Howdy, folks. This is John. We're going to be we're going to go and be getting back into ecology, the environment, and us for this chapter. This is chapter 23. Again, everything's posted on the canvas. Everything's in order. And finals will be announced or should be announced there as well. This recording might be used between different courses. So, I can't be super consistent about giving dates in the recording. With that, though, I think that we should get started. So I'm going to start the screen share, and then I'm going to go and get it all up. All right, there we go. That's one. Okay, so chapter 23, ecology, the environment, and us. So we're going to be talking about Earth as an ecosystem. We're going to be talking about the biosphere. We're going to be talking about ecological succession. We're going to be talking about energy flow. We're going to be talking about chemical cycles, and we're going to talk about biodiversity. So, ecology is the study of the interactions between organisms and the environment around them. The Earth is a closed ecosystem known as a biosphere. We do not have a source for additional materials, and materials do not tend to leave. That if we find another planet, that will be a new biosphere, like a new planet with life on it. Materials cycle between organisms and between the living and non-living components of the environment. Nutrients are going to be cycling through, energy is going to be cycling through. It's like that one song in The Lion King. Now, energy, it comes from the sun, and it's going to be captured by green plants and transferred from organism to organism. This is just a picture of the Earth. All as you can see, there's wind patterns and there's vegetation that's distributed in different patterns, and there's a shit ton of water. So this is the biosphere, the part of Earth where life exists, and it consists of many, many different ecosystems that are all interconnected. An ecosystem are all the organisms in a specific geographic area and their physical environment around them. So the way we like to say this, it includes both the organic and inorganic parts of this system. So a community is a subdivision within an ecosystem, and that is going to be composed of all the living species that can potentially interact with each other within this ecosystem. So this is all the organic components. Then below that, we have the smallest unit that we really care about for ecology, and that is the population, which is all the individuals of the same species that can still potentially interact with each other in one environment. So, like, I am in an ecosystem with other people in Fresno. I'm not in the same ecosystem as somebody in like London. We're not really running in the same circles. Now, a niche. So, an organism's role in the ecosystem. That's all a niche is. I threw this term around a lot in the last recording. But a niche is just all the way that you are getting calories and staying alive in your ecosystem and how you are going about it. Two separate niches. So let's say a niche. We have a possum. It eats bugs. It eats bugs off of the roots of trees. It is not picky about the type of bug. It likes to do this in the middle of the night. A different niche might still be eating the same bugs off the same tree, but it might be doing it at 3 in the afternoon, so that it's not going to be overlapping. That would be considered a different niche. It's important to note that two individual species cannot occupy the same niche for an extended period of time. They have to have some differentiation in their strategy, or the more efficient species will force out the other species. And that is the main issue behind like stuff like an invasive species. It's just filling the same niche as a pre-existing species, but more efficiently. Now, habitat. Habitat, that's just the place where an organism lives. It's going to be part of its niche. My habitat is the dry, dusty streets of Fresno. Now, succession. A sequence of changes in a species composition of a community over time. So, successive theory is something that is true in climates that have a pretty high amount of resources that have reasonably available, like calories or biomass in the soil. They have reasonable weather, like an aspect of sunlight at least part of the year, and they have readily available water. So, successive theory claims that any ecosystem starting from rocks, when left alone long enough, will slowly progress to like a late stage hardwood forest. We found that is only true in places that get ungodly amounts of rain. That's only true in places that get rainfall. We live in California, which is composed mainly of what are known as brittle ecosystems. Our ecosystems do not hinge off of that. Our ecosystems are going to go and be mainly focused on, our ecosystems are going to be mainly limited by available water. So our maximum succession might look very different than another forest. Basically, the two primary types from original successional theory are going to be primary and secondary. So, primary succession is going to occur where no previous community has existed. This would be like a place with no soil, like a bare rock. This would be like a lichen growing on a rock. The first species to invade such an area are going to include stuff like lichens. It's going to include, and we're going to call these pioneer species. These tend to not be competitive with any other species. They get outcompeted super easily, but they need like no resources. So they can go, so their entire strategy is surviving on areas of recent disturbance. After enough time, species are going to gradually be outcompeted. Organic matter is going to be worked into the soil. More and more mass is going to be growing. And this, as this community shifts, each time it shifts, it's going to be known as a succession event. And at some point, the communities are going to stop shifting. And this is going to be known as a climax community. Again, this is going to look very different in different places. Climax community in the Central Valley has always been a mixture of grassland and swamp. Uh, Climax community in the Sierras is pine forest. Climax community in Pennsylvania is going to be hardwood forest. So here you can see lichens slowly breaking down stone into soil. Then you see dwarf trees and grasses start to develop. This is forcing more organic matter in, allowing water to infiltrate better. And trees often become the dominant life form where water allows it. So, like on the East Coast, you might end up with like an old growth forest with a lot of hardwoods. Now, secondary succession, that is the later stages of this. So, secondary succession, this occurs when an existing community is cleared, and then there are a series of events that lead to and it kind of resets the succession for that region. So, like in the Sierras, an event like this would be like a wildfire. East Coast, probably be a flood. Europe, maybe an earthquake. So, whoops. So, at the start, soil will be present because an ecosystem has existed here before. We might even have like seed beds from the previous ecosystem. So the point is a secondary succession community is being built on top of a community that was destroyed before it. In general, instead, they kind of skip the soil creation aspect of like the lichen stage, and they go straight into grasses, weeds, short shrubby trees. And eventually, if it's the right type of climate, it should start to move back towards whatever the climate community is for that area. And again, California, mixture of grasslands and pine forests. So immediately after a fire, there are no visible. So this is like, let's say this is a fire that wiped through the Sierras. Immediately after fire, all life is dead. Dead trees stand. Ash covers everything. The following spring, the seed bed from all those dead trees has started to grow, making all these little seedlings. The seed bed from all the grass that was burned starts growing between them all. Give this another 200 years. You won't even be able to tell us anything happened. Now, energy. All of our energy is going to first enter an environment as solar energy. It's going to be trapped by photosynthetic organisms, and then it's going to be used to go and turn CO2 and water into glucose. So it's going to increase the chemical potential of the product. So it's going to take It's going to create a molecule that has a higher chemical potential of energy using solar energy to power that reaction. Now, after energy has been photosynthesized by photosynthetic organisms, it's going to go and be slowly fed to the rest of the environment through the trophic pyramids. This is also known as the food pyramid. And it so bottom of the pyramid, you're going to go and have your producers. These are your photosynthesizers, and they're going to form the foundation of the trophic level. Above those, you're going to have consumers. And the consumers are going to be primary, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary, depending on who they're eating. So the one that's going to be eating the producer, that's going to be the primary consumer. The one that's going to be eating the primary consumer, the secondary. One that's going to be eating the secondary, the tertiary, and the one that's going to be eating the quaternary is going, or sorry, eating the tertiary is going to be the quaternary. So each one eats the level before it. Now we will then so animals are typically going to be subdivided in this based off of their primary food source. So if they primarily eat if they primarily eat producers, they're going to go and be a herbivore. If they're eating primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers, then they're going to go and be considered a carnivore. Yeah. If it secondary, tertiary. If it is at the peak of its ecosystem, very often it will be quaternary, but it could also have a higher level of classification depending on how complicated the ecosystem is, or the ecosystem may climax at like secondary or tertiary and not have any animals above that. Omnivores are going to go and eat both plants and animals, and decomposers are going to take in or dead organic matter and metabolize it, releasing inorganic materials back into the soil that then can be used by producers. So it's really a giant like circle of life, at least the nutrient cycle is. Energy, it's a little bit different. Each time energy transfers between a trophic level, we only successfully transfer 10% of that energy. The rest is going to be lost as metabolic heat. So, grasshopper. Let's say we have two, three, four. Yeah, let's say we have 1,000 calories available in the grass. So this grasshopper eats 1,000 calories of grass biomass. It's only able to convert 10% of that into energy for the grasshopper. Then when the sparrow eats the grasshopper, it's only going to be able to convert 10% of that energy into sparrow. And then when the sparrow gets eaten by a falcon, only 10% of that energy is going to go and be converted into falcon. So we are losing 90% of our energy between each of these transfers, which means that biomass wise, the next level is always going to be about is always going to contain about 10% of the calories of the previous level. Kind of cool. Now, depictions of feeding relationships. There's a lot of way to model this. Food chain is like a hyper simplified one. It's linear and it's super simplistic and it's hyper unrealistic. There's very few animals that actually fit into a food chain. Then there are food webs. Food webs, most organisms are going to be eating at several trophic levels at once. And this is a much more realistic pattern. This is why you might not see this perfect ratio of 10% calorie mass, 10% calorie mass, 10% calorie mass, 10% calorie mass, because they might be pulling calories from several levels at once, which is going to mess up the math. And this is a lot more realistic. Humans, prime example. We eat vegetables. We eat grains and hell. Some of us even eat certain algae. Like I eat algae. It's seaweed wraps around sushi, that sort of thing. Humans are going to be eating the producers. They're going to be eating the consumers. They're going to be eating the secondary consumer. And then they're going to even be eating a tertiary consumer here. All of these animals are part of the human diet. All of these plants are part of the human diet. So we kind of occupy every single tier at once, except for the producer tier. Here's another bit more complicated one. So here you can see how we have this underwater ecosystem that's also going to be transferring energy through snail and frog and fish to this terrestrial ecosystem. And then and we also have, so the main producers here are going to be these underwater plants, the algae, and the grass. And you see it gets very complicated very quickly because every animal is going to be interacting in different ways. And here you see, like the heron is a secondary, tertiary, and quaternary consumer. So anytime energy travels between trophic levels, only about 10% of the energy is going to go and truly transfer over. The rest is lost as heat. Most ecosystems rarely have more than 4 or 5 trophic levels because of this. The exception are some aquatic ecosystems and some of the larger, more like you'll have heard of the national parks where these ecosystems exist. Now, energy is converted to biomass. Only energy, and biomass is the only energy available to the next trophic level. And biomass can be calculated as the dried out weight of an organism. So if I were to stuff an organism in a dehydrator for a week, what I'm left with is their final biomass. And it is important, biomass and calorific energy are not one for one. 1 pound of like dry biomass, like let's say muscle tissue, it's going to be like 3,000 calories. 1 pound of dry like hay is going to be like 35 calories. So the actual like mass of hay might be 100 times what the next trophic level is because it's abiding by calories and not mass. Here's another food circle. So foods eaten by herbivore, cellular respiration. Most of that is lost as heat to the environment. Then we eat the chicken. We lose most of that energy as heat to the environment. All these waste products are going to go to the decomposers that are going to, again, only retain about 10% of that energy, but their fecal matter, their waste products, is going to make fertilizer that then can go and be used by a producer that will recharge the system at the bottom using solar energy. Now, so again, there's a lot of different ways to go and represent this. The ecological pyramid or the trophic pyramid is one of the simpler ways to go and convey the energy transfer because each level of the food pyramid is going to go and be smaller than the level below it, kind of symbolizing that loss of biomass, symbolizing that loss of calories. Energy pyramid describes a number of individuals at each trophic level. Pyramids of biomass are going to go and be focused mainly on the biomass that's available in a system. This is going to ignore the calorific volume, so the ratios are not going to match the energy, like we mentioned in the previous slides. But this will go and actually give you a calculation for what the biomass is of a certain population in an area, which is super useful for supporting your studies. Yeah, so these are a couple different biomes that have variable amounts of rainfall. And you can go and see how rainfall is going to go and be like one of the main limiters for vegetation density. The higher the rainfall, the denser and the more developed the forest that can eventually grow. And that in California, because we have limited water, we have regions where grassland is the maximum succession. So we have 2 lessons from the ecological pyramid that we care about. The first is that certain substances, certain toxins, accumulate in the tissues of living organisms. Examples include like heavy metals, like lead. If I have a grasshopper and it needs to eat 10 calories of plants to get 1 calorie of body mass, we have now concentrated and let's say this grasshopper has now eaten, you know what, we'll start with the grasshoppers. We have 10,000 grasshoppers. Let's say each one's worth 1 calorie, and spread between them there's 10 pounds of lead. inside of their bodies. A sparrow shows up. It eats 1,000 grasshoppers, and now it has 1 pound of lead in its body. Uh, they a cluster of sparrows that are filled with lead are eaten by a hawk. Now it's going to have all the lead that was in each one of those sparrows concentrated in its body. The sparrow has all the lead that was in each one of those grasshoppers concentrated in its body. And if it's the right kind of toxin, it does not leave their body until they die. Which means that that the higher up the trophic pyramid you are, the more vulnerable you are to toxins that can accumulate in the food supply. Uh, yeah, and again, because of this concentration, it is more energy intensive to make meat than it is to make plant matter. This statement in the presentation is a little bit nonsensical. Uh, because yes, more humans can be nourished on a vegetarian diet because we are, or because than on a diet containing meat, but that also ignores a lot of the secondary concerns about a vegetarian diet that would generate an ecological footprint as well. But the point is, because if you feed people from lower down in the trophic pyramid, that is going to go and get nutrients to the top of the trophic pyramid. That is going to go and allow you to feed more people because every time you go down a level in the trophic pyramid, you are an order of operations or an order of magnitude more efficient. This is a good example of that kind of caloritic food pyramid. 10,000 calories of grass at the bottom, 1,000 calories of grasshoppers, 110. Only 10% of the energy available at the trophic level becomes biomass that is available to the next higher trophic level because we're losing everything as metabolic heat. Now, this concentration of toxins inside of the food chain is known as biological magnification. We actually have a good visual to go and describe this. And so here we start down here. We have a low concentration of mercury, but that's going to go and be staying and accumulating in our tissues. Unlike energy, we're not losing 90% of it as heat. So that means that every time we're having to go to a 10% of the energy budget for our production of biomass, we are keeping the same levels of like mercury or lead. And then that is going to go and in turn be concentrating by an order of magnitude higher in each creature on the trophic pyramid. This lady is at the top. She's eating tuna. That means that if she ate this, and if she ate, she's going to go and have a concentration of mercury that is at 10,000 instead of at 1,000. So, world hunger. If on average 10% of energy capture is available to the neck, then feeding at lower trophic levels is more efficient. This is the argument for like vegetarianism or limiting meat consumption. We adopt a largely or exclusively vegetarian diet, we need less land. It's just math. Although it is important to note that part of the utility of agricultural animals is that we can feed them things that we could not otherwise turn into a food source. We can put them out to pasture on land that's too crappy to go and turn into farmland. We can go and like feed them waste products from other agricultural like operations and so like put them to use. Like it's more of a way of exploiting alternative calories rather than directly exploiting our crops to the highest efficiency. But it is worth pointing out that in American agriculture, we finish cattle in a feedlot, and a feedlot is going to be feeding the cattle mainly agricultural products like corn, like it's grown specifically for the cattle. Now that is inefficient use of land. Alrighty. So here, this is just kind of demonstrating that trophic pyramid again. 20,000 calories, 2,000 passed on to the herbivore, only 200 passed on to the carnivore. We have a 90% loss as metabolic waste. For the same volume of grain, we can feed 10 humans because we are cutting out one of the orders of magnitude. This video also helps visualize that a little bit.
The flow of energy through the living world begins when light from the sun is absorbed by photosynthetic organisms such as plants, algae, and photosynthetic bacteria called cyanobacteria. Photosynthesis is a chemical process that essentially captures light energy and transforms it into the chemical energy of the sugars. These organisms, called the producers, form the lowest feeding level called a trophic level. Once the producer uses the energy in glucose to make new organic molecules, these molecules may be used by the producer or become food for an animal. All other organisms are consumers and use the energy that producers store. Consumers belong to higher trophic levels and are grouped on the basis of their food source. Primary consumers are herbivores, meaning they eat plants. Secondary consumers are carnivores, and they feed on primary consumers. Tertiary consumers are carnivores that feed on secondary consumers. This simple flow of energy and materials from one trophic level to the next is called a food chain. However, food choices are typically more complex. Humans, for example, are omnivores. We eat both plants and animals, and therefore we eat at different trophic levels. We could be considered primary consumers because we eat vegetables, secondary consumers because we eat chicken, which is a primary consumer, and tertiary consumers because we eat tuna, which is a secondary consumer. A community's pattern of feeding relationships is better described as a food web. In this simplified food web, note that a number of these organisms are feeding at more than one trophic level. The red-winged blackbird, for example, eats both seeds and insects, making it a secondary and tertiary consumer. Let's return to the more simplistic view of a food chain. If we consider the energy transfer from producers to tertiary consumers, we can see that in each transfer, on average, only 10% of the energy found in one trophic level becomes available to the organisms in the next trophic level. Therefore, if 10,000 calories worth of grass is available to grasshoppers, only 1,000 calories of those grass calories become incorporated into the grasshopper and available to the bird in the next trophic level. On average, 90% of the energy between the two trophic levels is lost. Where does 90% of the energy go? Roughly 2/3 of the energy from food digested by animals is used by the animals for cellular respiration. Some food is eaten, but cannot be digested and is lost as feces. Additionally, not all the food available at a given trophic level is captured and consumed. These losses become multiplied as the energy is transferred to successively higher trophic levels, until a point is reached where there simply is not enough food or energy to feed another level.
Alrighty, so that's just a nice summation of what we were just talking about. I like it. So it's important to note, because of these phenomena, the resources on Earth are limited. So we need to go and be able to, or sorry, let's move away from the energy cycles and towards the chemical cycles. So we know that all the materials on Earth are limited. We have the materials that we have. Without nature's recycling of materials, we will go and deplete those reserves. These are known as the biogeochemical cycles. And this is how materials going to go through a series of transfers to go from living to non-living systems and then reabsorbed back again into living systems. So this is the energy cycle that we were just talking about. Energy comes in like a few slides ago. It's kind of out of place, but energy is going to flow into the system, be lost as part of metabolic processes and waste. And nutrients are going to be retained and be gradually reincorporated back into digestible material for the use by producers by decomposers. So decomposers will go and recycle the materials to make them available for producers, and we are not going to lose any materials in this transfer. Energy, we lose 90% each time. Now, the first geochemical cycle to discuss is the water cycle. This is where water moves from the atmosphere to land as rain. and then eventually it's going to evaporate and transpire back up to the atmosphere to form new clouds and then fall as precipitation again at some point. Large amounts of water get temporarily stored in living things. So if a forest is present in an area, it's going to be constantly releasing water as waste, which is in turn going to go and make clouds and lead to more frequent rainfall compared to a barren area that's in the same region. It's not going to be adding water to the system, but a forest constantly cycles it. Now, water is part of the oxygen cycle. It's necessary for photosynthesis, and the majority of animals are going to need a water source to go and be able to successfully metabolize. Human activities can be very disruptive to the water cycle. Our biggest issue where we are is going to go and be pollution, like runoff, specifically agricultural runoff, and also it pollu- and his climate change are going to be like the two major things disrupting our water cycle. So both of those are going to be the byproduct of pollution mainly. So human deforestation has been more of a problem historically in the U.S. than it is now. It's still a problem in a lot of areas in Latin America and Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Runoff patterns in cities. So you might notice every time we get a rainstorm, Fresno floods. This is because all the solid surfaces that we make, like that are non-permeable, like roads and roofs and things like that, do not allow the water to evenly soak in, and so instead it just makes big riverlets, and which in turn, when they return to an ecosystem, can cause disproportionate erosion, which will in turn make more pollution. Here's a here is here's a little video on the water cycle that goes in a bit more detail and also establishes some visuals for you to work with.
Hydrologic cycle is the process by which water circulates around the Earth. The hydrologic cycle is important because of the role water plays in biological processes, climate, and other elemental cycles. We will now look at the various processes that govern the hydrologic cycle. 1. Evaporation and transpiration. Water evaporates from both land and the ocean. In addition, through the process of transpiration, plants take up water from the soil and then emit it as water vapor through their leaves. 2. Precipitation. Water as water vapor is transported into the atmosphere by evaporation and transpiration, but eventually falls back to the Earth. 90% of this water vapor returns to the ocean and 10%.
I remember the other issue our community deals with. We are depleting our aquifers from irresponsible agricultural practices, mainly centered around almond cultivation and beef cultivation, that is leading to saltwater from the ocean to start flooding inland because it's not being kept out by the water pressure from the fresh water anymore. This is leading to our water becoming more and more salty. Wells are becoming saltier and saltier. And in general, I mean, because if we keep making these decisions, if we keep letting a lot of these big ag producers make these short-term decisions, they're going to destroy all the soil in California. That's not good. I mean, a salty aquifer is not an aquifer of a successful state.
And returns to the land as precipitation. Precipitation can take the form of rain, snow, or fog. 3. Runoff. Water either from the land surface or as groundwater makes its way to the ocean. 4. Groundwater production. Precipitation that falls on land and subsequently seeps through the porous rock and soil, pooling above layers of impermeable rock, serves as the source for groundwater. The porous rock that groundwater is stored in is called an aquifer. An aquifer can be drilled to provide wells for fresh water.
In addition, we also have confined groundwater. This is water that's removed from the ecosystem because it's bound between too much stone. So this is the water cycle. but there's a lot of different stages. There's a lot of different ways that water can be stored, but it all comes down to one thing. Evaporation brings water up, transpiration brings water up, and then precipitation brings it back down. And this cycle is important. And once the water is down, we're very worried about pollutants. So now, the carbon cycle. This is from the environment into living things and then back into the environment. Carbon is the foundation of the majority of organic molecules. So the main part of the carbon cycle that interfaces with us is going to go and be CO2. So CO2 is removed from the environment by producers during photosynthesis. And that is how carbon is going to be used to go and synthesize tissues in our body. In addition, we return carbon to the atmosphere because one of the waste products of cellular respiration is CO2. It's important to note that carbon, we never are using all the carbon available to us in the system. Carbon is present in very high levels in like subterraneanly in like volcanoes and like lava and molten stone. But we do have some that is temporarily delayed in use that then gets reintroduced into the environment later. Good examples of this would be like the wood of a tree. It's not participating in the carbon cycle, but it might be standing there for 200 years. Limestone. Limestone will naturally precipitate CO2 out of the environment. And then there's also at least until it's burned, in which case it is re-released. And then you also have fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are made out of complicated hydrocarbons, pretty much the fossils of like algae. But because they have been turned into oil and buried beneath ground, they were removed from the ecosystem. They weren't participating in the carbon cycle. When we burn these fuels, CO2 is a huge part of the waste that comes away from those fuels. And so that's going to go and be reintroducing them into the carbon cycle, bringing us closer in line with a previous era with higher greenhouse gases, like the Carboniferous. Now, so there are three processes that can go and release carbon from these long-term storage sites. If you remember in our last recording, I was talking about successional theory and how we live in a brittle ecosystem where we don't have enough water to go and decompose stuff, and so we're kind of limited in succession. That is because our system is regulated by fire. Dead plant matter is supposed to be removed by fire or by heavy grazing. Before humans arrived, there was a lot of Pleistocene megafauna that participated in this heavy grazing and was in turn getting rid of the organic matter because it's too dry to decompose a lot of things in California. Then after the humans arrived and drove those extinct, they took over with controlled burns and like herd management and stuff. And then when the Europeans came and drove off the Native Americans and killed a bunch of them, they stopped doing that, and we had a series of extreme wildfires while we slowly realized that California needs fire to regulate its systems, or it needs heavy grazing because things can't decompose. They just turn into stands and they oxidize and they turn into timber and until it bundles up and you get a big fire. You want lots of little fires so you don't have to have the big fire. Another aspect is erosion. That's just going to go and be the action of the wind and the action of like abrasives and water on the material. So this is more like you'll go and see limestone getting dissolved by riverlets of water running through it. That's releasing CO2. And exposed stone or exposed soil that's uncovered. That's also going to be releasing CO2. Human activities increase the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. Burning fossil fuels and deforestation is a big factor in that. And as a result of increased atmospheric CO2, we have had, so we say global warming. It's more global climate change. Basically, weather is less predictable. Patterns of weather are changing. Some areas are getting a lot colder. Some are getting a lot hotter. We also end up with increased acidity of the oceans and occasionally acid rain as well, which is not great. It's like increased acidity of the ocean kills pretty much anything that has a shell or anything that's a coral. It's not good. And acid rain destroys infrastructure. Like it will cut the life of a building down by like a tenth of what it should be. So this video is just kind of navigating carbon accumulation over time.
Concern about the buildup of methane gas, carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, increase is now regarded as a cause of global warming. However, if Earth has a fixed quantity of elements, in this case the carbon and oxygen that make up CO2, how could there be a buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? The answer is that the carbon has been transferred from one place on Earth to another. The pattern of circulation of an element or molecule among living organisms and the environment is called a biogeochemical cycle. Biological organisms create a continuous exchange of carbon between the atmosphere and the biota. During photosynthesis, plants, some protists, and some bacteria take up atmospheric CO2 and convert it to sugar. CO2 is released from the biota into the atmosphere during cellular respiration of both plants and animals. When terrestrial organisms die, their carbon becomes part of the soil. There, it provides energy to decomposers, mostly bacteria and fungi. These decomposers in the soil convert a large amount of this carbon into CO2 that is released into the atmosphere. Some of the carbon in the remains of dead organisms becomes locked up in carbon-based components such as coal or oil. The burning of these fossil fuels puts the carbon into the atmosphere in the form of CO2. The dilemma of fossil fuel burning is that the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is currently greater than the uptake and eventual recycling of carbon into the soil by plants. Therefore, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 has been growing for the past 100 years. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere results in a greater greenhouse effect, and many scientists believe that this is in part responsible for global warming. Carbon dioxide is so called because it acts like the glass panes in a greenhouse. It lets solar energy in, but it does not let heat out. Solar radiation reaching the Earth consists of a mixture of wavelengths, including visible light, shorter wavelength ultraviolet light, and longer wavelength infrared light. Most of this radiation travels through the atmosphere to the surface of the Earth. Here, the land and oceans absorb many of the shorter wavelengths in the visible and ultraviolet spectra. Others are simply reflected from the surface. Earth's surface then emits much of the absorbed radiation in the form of longer wavelength infrared, also called radiation. Although much of this radiation gets lost in space, some of it is trapped by the greenhouse gases, leading to global warming.
Yeah. So this has been known about since about the 1930s. There were several publications discussing this phenomenon back in the 1930s, and that there was concern that the use of oil as fuel might eventually worsen this. This research was in large part hidden by oil and gas companies that had an interest in keeping that research from coming forward. It's only in recent years that the data has just become too overwhelming to hide. Now, this is the carbon cycle. As you can see, we have all these different sources of carbon: plant matter, animal matter, limestone, fossil fuels. And then as they combust, they're released as CO2. And the only way CO2 can be reabsorbed back into the system is through the accumulation in the tissues of living creatures. Or I suppose, we could throw a bunch of shit in a volcano, but that's probably not going to help. Now, one of the ones that we really worry about a lot in agriculture is the nitrogen cycle. So the principal constituent of molecules needed for life. This is going to include proteins and nucleic acids, which are often in short supply to living systems. Nitrogen is very often the limiting nutrient in a system. The largest reservoir is the atmosphere, which is 79% nitrogen gas, but that gas is unavailable to animals. It cannot be metabolized by animals. It's just inert. So atmospheric nitrogen cannot interact with life directly. However, some bacteria present in the roots of certain plants, including legumes like beans and peas, actually can pull nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn it into ammonia, which is a type of chemical, which is the basis of a lot of chemical fertilizers. So alfalfa is a good example as well. If you have a field with really bad soil, growing a couple rounds of legumes and then just plowing them back into the soil at the end is a pretty good way to go and get some more fertilizer in there, get some more organic matter, get some nitrogen. Nitrification is another way that it can occur. Nitrification is the next step in this process. Basically, bacteria in the soil converts the ammonium first to nitrite, which is less toxic than ammonium, but still too toxic to be metabolized by most plants and animals, and then into nitrate, which nitrate is still toxic to animals, but way less so. And this is going to be the main form of nitrogen that can be absorbed by plants. So plants use nitrate to produce proteins and nucleic acids. Animals eat the plant, use the plant's nitrogen-containing chemicals, and then produce proteins and nucleic acids of their own. Plants and animals then die, and then decomposers convert all those nitrogen-containing molecules back to ammonia. And then from there, the nitrifying bacteria slowly break it back down into nitrate. Denitrification is something that's done by certain bacteria as a byproduct. It's like a waste product. And basically, they convert nitrates into nitrogen gas, which then returns nitrogen to the atmosphere. This is important in the grand scale of the ecosystem, but it's not something that you want in your soil. So nitrogen in the atmosphere gets nitrogen fixed by bacteria on the roots of plants. Those plants then accumulate that nitrogen in their tissues, and from there it passes on to animals. And then it has a chance to get denitrified by bacteria in the ocean and bacteria in the soil, which then returns it to the atmosphere. So the biggest issues that we have with nitrogen comes down to three things. Firstly, runoff. So agricultural runoff of nitrogen is a huge problem. It poisons water supplies, and it really comes down from using liquid fertilizers. Liquid fertilizers can run into the water table super easy. Solid fertilizers, lot harder for them to do that. So if like you're plowing in a couple tons of hay to go and add some organic matter to your soil, that's not going to go and cause pollutions. You dump a couple tons of pig shit over your field, that's going to cause pollution. So in addition, nitrogen dioxide is a waste product. Yeah. Nitrogen dioxide, nitrogen gas, is a waste product from fossil fuel. This is a different type of nitrogen than the normal nitrogen. But that can react with water vapor to go and form acids, which then follows acid rains, which one acidifies the ocean, but also destroys our buildings. And this forms nitric acid. We also can form carbonic acid by passing water through CO2. So human activities in the nitrogen cycle, sunlight can cause hydrocarbons and NO2 to form a photochemical smog. So smog is a byproduct of the different hydrocarbons that are the waste products of combusting petroleum, combining with NO2 in the atmosphere. This discusses the nitrogen cycle in a bit more detail.
The largest reservoir of nitrogen is the atmosphere, which is about 79% nitrogen gas, symbolized N2. Nitrogen is a principal constituent of a number of molecules needed for life, including proteins and nucleic acids. Nitrogen is often in short supply to living systems, so its cycling is of particular importance. Nitrogen gas cannot interact with life directly. Before it can be used, nitrogen gas must be converted to a form that living organisms can use, ammonium or NH4+. The process of converting nitrogen gas to ammonium is called nitrogen fixation. This is performed by nitrogen-fixing bacteria, many of which live in nodules on the roots of leguminous plants such as peas and alfalfa. Ammonium is converted to nitrite, or NO2-, and then to nitrate, NO3-, by nitrifying bacteria living in the soil, in a process called nitrification. The ammonium or nitrates are first absorbed by plants, which use the nitrogen to form plant proteins and nucleic acids. The nitrogen then passes through the food web and is incorporated into the nitrogen-containing compounds of animals. When plants and animals die, decomposers, such as bacteria, break down the waste products and dead bodies of plants and animals, producing ammonium. Much of the ammonium is converted to nitrate by nitrifying bacteria. Other bacteria balance the nitrogen cycle by performing a process called denitrification, in which the nitrates that are not assimilated into living organisms are converted to nitrogen gas. Denitrifying bacteria are found in wet soil, swamps, and estuaries. The triple bond between the two nitrogen atoms is extremely strong. As already discussed, some types of bacteria can break this bond and make the nitrogen available to living organisms. The energy in lightning can also break the bond in a nitrogen molecule. The process forms nitrogen oxides, which dissolve in rain to form nitrate. The nitrate falls to earth with the rain and becomes available to living organisms. Human activity fixes a large amount of nitrogen and disturbs the nitrogen cycle. Through industrial processes, we fix nitrogen to make artificial fertilizers for crops. The natural process of denitrification cannot keep pace with the rate of industrial nitrogen fixation and the amount of nitrogen added to the land in commercial fertilizers. The result is an excess of fixed nitrogen, which moves into nearby streams, rivers, ponds, or lakes in runoff. Fertilizer runoff increases the nutrients of water in a lake or pond, a phenomenon called eutrophication. The nutrient boost can lead to an explosive growth of photosynthetic organisms such as algae. When these organisms die, their remains accumulate at the bottom of the lake. Decomposers then thrive, depleting the water of dissolved oxygen. Gradually, fish such as pike, sturgeon, and whitefish, which require higher oxygen concentrations in the water, are replaced by less desirable species, such as catfish and carp, which can tolerate lower levels of dissolved oxygen.
Yeah, so this is a particular issue in California because we have very, very clear waterways naturally. We have like no nutrients. It's all mountain runoff, like the America River, the Sac River, and the San Joaquin. Last 100 years of agriculture have not been good to those rivers. They used to have salmon runs. They used to have sturgeon runs. They used to have lamprey runs. There was just billions of calories of seafood swimming all the way up to like the high Sierras. But between dams, agricultural pollution, overfishing, we've lost a lot of those. In recent years, we're getting some of them back in a lot of the northern rivers because they're removing the dams and regulating the fisheries. But I mean, San Joaquin River, it's right here, and it used to be the biggest salmon run on the West Coast, bigger than any of the ones in Alaska even. Now, moving from the nitrogen cycle, we got the phosphorus cycle. This is going to be cycling between rocks and living organisms. Humans mess with this one a little bit because we will mine phosphorus and then turn it into fertilizer. We also will mine ammonium, turn it into fertilizer, or we'll mine nitrogen products and turn it into fertilizer as well. Right. So phosphorus, essential component of many genetic molecules. It's important to DNA. It's important to ATP. It's found in all lipids, so that's all fats. And it's also an important component of our bones and our teeth as well. So sedimentary rock is the reservoir for phosphorus, found in the form of phosphate ions. Rainwater then slowly dissolves phosphates out of rocks, which then can be absorbed by the adjacent soil, and then from there absorbed by different producers. The producers then pass it to the rest of the food web. Decomposers release phosphates as waste back into the soil where they can be reabsorbed by a plant. So here you'll notice a lot of these cycles, they look rather familiar, you know, like there is this general cycling between the inorganic components and the organic components. Now, a phenomena. So, like if you make nutrients too readily available in an aquatic system, you're going to have an explosive growth of algae. That algae is going to use up all the oxygen in the water. And then, because it's going to lose all that oxygen, everything in the lake, including the algae, is going to die. This then, all that material then rots, which releases more toxins into the water, which then perpetuates this cycle and eventually can lead to sterilization of the water. Have you ever heard of a red tide? That is an example of a eutrophication event. Uh, or if you've ever seen like a pond just get swallowed by algae, eutrophication. And it's usually due to agricultural waste runoff. Yeah, so this is that phenomenon. We have dramatic increases in photosynthetic organisms. They bloom and die and fall to the bottom. They get eaten by and in the process of decomposers breaking them down, all the oxygen is absorbed, and pretty much everything dies. Now, we all right. So you'll notice that there is a pattern of human behavior disrupting ecosystems. But again, this isn't supposed to be very misanthropic. I just think that these were the tools that were necessary to get us where we are. Now we're clever enough and we have the technology and we have the social organization to go and start making legislation and management techniques and technologies to make it so that we can win while nature also wins. So the metric by which we measure how much nature is winning is going to be biodiversity. So biodiversity is the number of species that are present in a given area and that factored in with the relative abundance of each species. In general, it's decreasing globally due to human interference. Habitat destruction is very much a large part of that. Quite frankly, we are overpopulated for how big of an animal we are. There's never been megafauna that occurs at this frequency in a terrestrial system. Now, human disturbances lead to changes in biodiversity. Mass extinctions, these have occurred. So we have gone through 3 mass extinction events as a species. The last one, which has been happening for about the last 10,000 years, is caused by human activity. It has accelerated in the last 300 years. So 10,000 years ago, we started causing mass extinctions of megafauna as we started to adopt agriculture. We spread globally. We killed a lot of animals. It wasn't great. We also, our progenitor species, Homo erectus, did the same thing 300,000 years before that, and then the same thing again 1.6 million years before that. These were not considered, these were all mass extinction events in that they were extinction events that occurred on multiple continents, but they were targeted mainly towards megafaunic species. So ecologically, they did not leave an impact on the ecosystem to the level that you would associate with a mass extinction. In the last 300 years, we've kind of changed how we are damaging the ecosystem. Before this point, we would overhunt species. That was the main way we did damage. Now we started to destroy habitat. We were burning down forests for mass agriculture. We were producing industrial waste, causing mass pollution. Global warming and the CO2 release. This is not our first pollutant that has caused untold damage to the environment. We call this extinction event that has occurred in the last 300 years. We call this the Holocene extinction. The extinction event that occurred 10,000 years ago, well, roughly from like 50,000 to 10,000 years ago, or 100,000 to 10,000 years ago, we call that the Quaternary extinction. Both of them were heavily influenced by humans, but humans are solely responsible for the Holocene extinction. We have never been losing species at this rate since the Carboniferous. We're losing about 100 species a day. That's a lot. Now, there's a lot of different causes for biodiversity. Introduction of alien species. I mean, this is something that we've been doing for the last 10,000 years. A lot of the extinctions in the Polynesian islands, as they were first colonized by, Polynesians, was because they brought in pigs and rats, which drove animals extinct. The aurochs was hunted to extinction. Alien species. And nowadays, the cane toad, the I can't remember, the nutria, the starling, all these are invasive species that have been intentionally introduced across continents by people, which is not something that really happened this fast before. Overexploitation also has been happening. I mean, we've been overhunting for 100,000 years. Habitat destruction is a little bit newer. We have never quite reshaped our environment in this way before. We are leveling forests and we are destroying grasslands. We're not quite sure what's going to happen because the only thing that's ever been able to change habitat this quickly before this point was natural disasters. And most of those don't tend to cover a continent the way people do. So why do we care about biodiversity? Well, genetic diversity is super useful. Makes species more resilient. It also gives us more tools to work with for genetic engineering. And occasionally we'll even go and do things like hybridize a gene from like a wild grass into a corn to make it resistant to a certain type of toxin. A lot of different animals and plants both will create novel chemicals that can be used in the development of new drugs. In fact, last year they discovered a cancer treatment in the Amazon rainforest that was being produced by studying a chemical on the back of a frog. This was last year, 2024. That's nuts. Now, and then, of course, there's also the fact of the biogeochemical cycle. Our entire food supply depends on the biogeochemical cycle. Our air supply depends on the biogeochemical cycle. Our water supply depends on the biogeochemical cycle. Organisms perpetuate this, and they clean water, and they clean air, and they clean soil. It's a good way. We need biodiversity because it, in part, is how we manage our waste on top of all the other reasons. If we don't have like all these wildlands that can go and pull carbon from the atmosphere or clean water or disrupt hurricanes, then our cities are going to have to do it instead. And that's not ideal. So, given what I've given you here, you should be able to describe the Earth as a closed system with energy as the only input. You should be able to define use the term biosphere, ecosystem, community, population, niche, and habitat. Should be able to explain how primary and secondary succession can lead to a climax community. You should be able to differentiate between producers and consumers, food chains and food webs, and herbivores, omnivores, carnivores, and decomposers. Should be able to explain how energy and biomass pyramids are used to depict energy flow and the accumulation of pollutants in food. Should be able to talk about, trace the cycle of the water, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycles through living and non-living system, and describe the impact on humans as defined within this presentation. And in addition, you should have pretty good set of reasons now to defend the ecological importance of biodiversity. And again, this isn't about like sending you out to go pick a fight with a farmer. It's just about giving you the proper terminology so you can kind of understand what's happening and you can hopefully make some decisions in the future that are going to go and help protect biodiversity. Or if you come across someone who has some negative ideas, maybe you can go and give them something new to work with. All right. Okay, I'll stop the share. Alrighty, folks. So I believe that this might be the last video of content for this semester. From here, I believe we're going into finals. So just want to say thank you so much for sticking it out. I know this is an incredibly hard course. This is a course that is a filter course for the school. It's designed to be difficult. In addition, the online courses have a additional layer of scrutiny because of this. I just, especially if you're taking this during summer, which is during our high intensity loading, I applaud you. This was a hard class. You did a damn fine job. And yeah, I hope you guys do well. And I hope you got something useful out of it. Bye bye.